You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. This is your host, Koku. Today, we are reading this paper called African Redefined, the Problem of Collective Black Identity. So before we get into this paper, the first question would be, well, do you guys have a problem with or see problems with collective Black identity? Right, let's start off with that question. You guys think about that. If you're on live with me today, I appreciate it. You could answer that question in the chat room. If you're not live with me, I appreciate you still. Thank you for listening. Make sure all you guys hit the subscribe button if you aren't already. Click the thumbs up, give this video a thumbs up, and click the bell to be notified when I'm on again, or whenever I upload new content. As I always do, this is a reminder that this show is a part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio. We have other shows on the network, and you guys should be checking out these shows as well.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And also make sure to check out the Queen's Council podcast. You can check out the most recent episode on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. All right. So, by the way, before I continue with the reading, I don't mention this often, but as you can see scrolling across the screen for you guys looking at the playback or watching it live, there's the Cash App. Cash App is Bitter Meds, the same as my Twitter handle, Bitter Meds. You guys donate to the Cash App. I'm going to upgrade the Discord so that we can get some larger files there, and you guys can offset the cost of that. All right, or just donate because you like to see the show prosper. How about that? How about we stick to our idea of health, wealth, and relationships? And how about, just wanting to see the show prosper in the three markets? Okay. All of that out the way. The African Redefined, the Problems of Collective Black Identity, all right, by Layden Anis. In 1960, Wellesley College invited eminent scholars, Africanists, and diplomats to discuss the question, does Africa exist? The symposium was organized to resolve whether or not Africa really exists as any sort of political, economic, cultural, or other concept. The challenge facing the experts was to determine whether Africa constitutes an entity, whether it has a real ethnic, geographical, economic, cultural, or political identity. Fortunately, most of the speakers agreed with the late Ralph Bunchy that there is an Africa seen as a continent, as a physical entity, which takes concrete political and economic shape. You know, I like to highlight stuff. That Africa, Bunchy argued, is exploding onto the international political scene with an increasingly militant and demonstrable renaissance in terms of heightened and unified aspirations for true self-determination, human rights, rapid economic transformation, and the assertion of a collective dignity and unity for all peoples of African descent. I like that. I like that. To continue. When scholars ask whether Africa exists, they question the African identity. This question is raised because of the psychological, racial, and historical relationships that have existed between Europeans and peoples of European descent and the people of Africa. Europeans and peoples of European descent and people of Africa, denial of African identity is an integral part of the history of Western encounter with Africa. From the beginning of this encounter to the present, Africans have had to justify and defend many aspects of African identity. The contemporary African historian is sometimes still weighed down by the necessity of disproving the established dogma that European brought Africa into the mainstream of history. It was long fashionable to believe that African nationalism did not exist, or that it was merely an extension of European nationalism. Speaking of that, in the Discord, I post this video and I ask folks to kind of weigh in on their thoughts. And you know, I guess it's an hour-long video, so folks probably didn't watch it. But in that video, there's a discussion this white boy is putting down with this black nationalist female, and it's like a call-in show. And he's arguing that black nationalism is just like white nationalism, and it'll be just as problematic as white nationalism in the future. If you want to hear more about it, make sure to join the Discord. Right? As I've been saying every single episode for the last few weeks, join the Discord. I'll post a link shortly. If Discord wouldn't stop acting so slow sometimes. Right? Discord is kind of acting slow. I don't want that to slow down what I'm doing. So I'll post it shortly. But yeah, the idea of the video is questioning, or in actuality, it's asserting that these two things are the same. I would like to see what you guys think of it. So if you're new here and you are not familiar, the Bitter Medicine Podcast has a Discord server that we're looking to upgrade, which is why I talked about donating to the Cash App. And you could just donate, you know, $1. I don't mind. You know, there's no big scene about it. Just donate whatever you have. A couple of coppers, as my grandfather would say, or you know, $5 or whatever, right? So in this Discord, it's dedicated to the podcast as well as to the podcast project. And you guys, when the link is put up in the chat, you guys can click the link and head on over. You know, announce yourselves, of course. Ask how you can help. You know, are you here to help with the podcast, or are you here to help work on this African-centered curriculum that our episodes have been about for like the past year now or more, right? To continue, even after the liquidation of European colonialism, African elites, the intelligentsia, and indeed anyone who receives education at all, continue to be presented to the world as marginal people who have been alienated from their culture and uprooted from their traditions. Isn't that something I say all the time? Whoever dares to acquire an education in Africa becomes a westernized elite. In these days of military rule On the continent, African military officers who have been involved in politics are studied and analyzed largely in terms of the training they received in Western military academies and the bearing such training may have on African politics. The perspective implies that Africa and Africans owe almost everything to the West. This leads to a Western insistence on setting criteria for what should constitute African identity and distorts the view of African music, literature, art, and culture. Western nations attempt to pronounce judgment on every African identity before it was accepted as authentic or real. In many subtle ways, the West today discountenances whatever the African projects projects as his own, and insists that most of what is deemed authentically African in contemporary African experience is at best an aberration of ill-managed Western experiences. This assumes that the West must remain the standard of reference for Africa and Africans. Thus, in the literary or formal discussions of African art, literature, politics, history, and culture, even by African elites, Africa and Africans are not always the primary audience. One time, the West was usually Africa's principal audience. Elite African discourse was primarily addressed to Western people and secondarily to the African masses themselves. And since African authenticity has generally been denied by the intended audience, the African is inevitably cast in the role of a disadvantaged defender. The notion has grown that whatever is not Western in origin belongs in the realm of traditional Africa. Tradition, in the sense, is conceived of as an identity to be despised, fought, and uprooted, because tradition and modernity are thought to be locked in mortal combat, denying any possibility of integration, accommodation, or even coexistence. This partly accounts for the characterization of African elites and the literati as marginal, alienated men and women. The fact that the elites are playing roles imposed on them by a history they do not make is seldom considered. Thus, if African elites reject certain traditional values on rational grounds by virtue of their educational experiences, they are not credited with common sense. On the contrary, they are seen as people alienated from their tradition. If they uphold new national symbols, they become detribalized. If they seek to adapt their Western experiences to the African situation by upholding traditional values wherever they think such values ought to remain in force, they become either a retribalized group or traditionalists. If the African is neither an urban dweller nor a literati, he remains a tribal man. The African is invariably perceived either as a loser or a defender. These concepts of identity constitute the subtle mechanisms of denial and negation of many aspects of complex African experiences. I like how that paragraph read just now. If you like the video so far, make sure to give it a thumbs up. A lot of times I get listeners who listen to the whole thing and they don't give it a thumbs up. The thumbs ups help me. The African responds with what G.M. Carter calls the compulsion towards the concept of African, which argues that politically there is an Africa which is much more real to the educated Africans of the continent than is the continent of Europe to educated Europeans, or are the Americas to the Americans. It is a neat identity. If a neat identity, quote unquote neat identity, cannot be invented for Africans, perhaps geography may yet help to forge an acceptable one. The phrase Africa south of the Sahara not only reduces the force of the dilemmas, but has in fact gained universal acceptance both within and without Africa. I personally, I hate to hear continental Africa, or you know, really any African talk about sub-Saharan Africa, right? The distinction is geographical to the extent that the bleak vastness of the Sahara Desert effectively divides the people and cultures of the areas north and south of it. However, far too much has been made of the Great Sahara Divide. It makes as much sense to speak of sub-Saharan Africa as it does to speak of the Middle East, the Near East, the Far East, or the Indian subcontinent. To speak within the framework of these categories is deliberately to limit one's geographical scope of reference without necessarily imposing predetermined cultural norms on the people to be found there. That is the extent of objective spatial geography. The unfortunate fact is that these simple geographical categories usually confer specific identities on the people living within their boundaries. You take on these definitions, right? Or, you know, you just look at the geography or the geographical categories, right? Then you're going to end up with these specific identities, right, that stick out or stand out from the complete identity of being African. And this is where we get a lot of these African wars, these diaspora wars, right? Because folks are only looking at, you know, simple geographical categories. I'm from the US, I'm from Jamaica, I'm from the UK, I'm from, you know, Senegal, you know, or what have you. We limit ourselves and we create our own disconnections. Like I always remember something Dr. John Henry Clark said. He said, like, yo, be proud of where you're from. That's cool. But at the end of the day, always remember you are a African, right? To continue, thus to speak of the Near or Middle East implies less about geography than about Arabs with assured predetermined characteristics. Similarly, when Western people speak of sub-Saharan Africa, they refer to more than a geographical category. They refer to particular races, cultures, and perhaps sub-civilizations. Sub-Saharan Africa becomes one way of regrouping the peoples of the continent and judging their levels of progress toward a presumed higher culture and civilization. The countries and peoples of North Africa, Mauritania, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Sudan, and the United Arab Republic are viewed socially, culturally, religiously, and politically as belonging to a world order different from those prevailing on the other side of the Great Sahara Divide. Such a view of North Africa argues that this part of Africa is an integral part of the Mediterranean basin, and that it is objectively associated with the Near or Middle East by sound historical, linguistic, ethnic, and religious ties. According to this view, the people of North Africa are not to be identified as Africans, but as Arabs, who belong to a distinct Islamic, cultural, and religious group. This kind of deliberate imbalance in the degree of emphasis to be placed on historical facts has allowed those holding this view generally to insist on linking North Africa geographically to the Mediterranean basin, and culturally to the Middle East. Any social recognition of North Africa as a part of the Mediterranean civilization would have brought the North Africans dangerously close to equality with Southern Europeans. Because North Africa represents a level of cultural progress and civilization recognized in history, this view has settled for defining Africa in such a way that it is detached from, for defining North Africa in such a way that it is detached from the rest of Africa, removed from the Mediterranean Southern European context, and permanently associated with the Middle East. For a long time, the Arabs of North Africa accepted this identification as a valid and accurate description of existing realities. That's why when I hear y'all talking about, all these Africans, like from North Africa, these Arabs and stuff, they're Africans too. Forget that. They're Arab first. They'll tell you that they're Arab first. Right? All Gaddafi and them was talking about being Arabs. Right? Until very recently, 1957 to 1958, the Arabs in North Africa tended to see themselves as non-Africans. In any case, Africa was too backward to be linked in any way to Arab collective unity, Arab collective identity. The decolonization of most of sub-Saharan Africa, especially the founding of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, the membership of all the North African countries in the OAU, and the establishment of the African Caucus in the United Nations. In brackets, the caucus includes all the North African states, has reduced but not eliminated the ambivalence of Arab North Africa toward the rest of the African continent. And that's one of the things I knock Malcolm X for. Malcolm X took on the identity of being a Muslim. And in so doing, and then, after the split with the NOI, he sought to become more orthodox Muslim, which led to him taking his Hajj, and in creating the OAU, in the process of helping to create the OAU, the brother was out there, rubbing elbows with white Arabs. I'm sorry, white Arabs, but with white Muslims. And so a guy like Malcolm X, due to his religion, right, would have thought that these white guys in the north of Africa, these Arabs, were his allies, and wanted to see the best for the continent as a whole. These guys don't care about the continent as a whole. That's why I personally am not a fan of Christianized nor Islamized Negroes around me. I have a disdain for all of them. Right now on Twitter, there's a brother named Bishop Talbot Swan. I like him. I follow him on Twitter. Right? Again, he ain't up around me, and I'm not up around him. But at the end of the day, he gets his props because he goes after Trump and Candace Owens and all that stuff. But I just want to remind you folks that this guy is a Christian. A bishop in the Christian church. And as far as I'm concerned, you can't trust those folks too tough. Their religion sells them out. Right? So when we're reading in this paper about the Arab countries and the OAU, I laugh to myself because I know that them Arabs ain't checking for no Africans. The real Africans. These guys are conquerors. They come there with a conqueror's spirit. These are conquerors with a conqueror's spirit. Right? To continue. The Arab countries in the OAU have supported the organization to the degree that the OAU supports Arab positions in the UN, particularly with reference to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Even if the North African states identify collectively with sub-Saharan Africa, their unavoidable preoccupation with the Arab-Israeli conflict leaves them little time to consider continental problems and few resources to contribute toward solving a distinctly sub-Saharan problem. Now, you could argue there, if they focused on being a part of the, the collective that includes sub-Saharan, so-called sub-Saharan Africa, they would have been able to get rid of their Arab-Israeli problem. But they don't really want to be included, right? Thus, the nature and configuration of historical and political problems inevitably continue to identify and orient North Africa towards the Middle East and away from a distinct collective African identity. I see in the chat room there's some activity here. We got Daily Affirmations by Pauline. Shout out to Daily Affirmations by Pauline, by the way. She said, I can never understand the disconnect and discrimination within the African diaspora, whether from the Caribbean, the Americas, Africa, etc. We are all African. Yeah, I mean, we all play, I think every group plays a role, and I think every group plays a role in this. So I just want to be clear. I never want to make it seem like it's just one group doing the most. I think every group plays a role in thought, word, deed, or omission. The Pan-Africanists, let's be honest, haven't done a good job in outreach, haven't done a good job, especially since the so-called civil rights movement, haven't really done a good job through the years, in recent years, to prove the benefits of Pan-Africanism, and also to prove the punishment, as only Tassé will point out, right, for not being Pan-African, right? And then there's a human aspect where every group thinks their group is fly, right? Every group thinks their group is fly. A Bahamian thinks they're the best thing on the earth, right? So does a Jamaican. So does a Trinidadian, right? And so we should expect Black Americans at some point to think that way too. Or Brits, Black Brits to think that way somewhat too. But the work has to be steadily put in to remind folks just who the enemy is. And that's really what it comes down to. We don't understand who our enemy is. And once you don't understand who your enemy is, who your focus is supposed to be on, you're going to start fighting amongst yourself. Big business understands that. Big business has systems set up. Let's say if you're working for Coke, don't come around here drinking no Pepsi, right? Like they literally do have systems set up where you're not supposed to be messing with the so-called rival or the enemy. But we haven't really, and not for lack of trying, I mean, people have tried, but the enemy is always countering what you do. And so people just don't get it that the enemy is not a Black American. The enemy is not a Nigerian. The enemy is not a Jamaican or Bahamian or Trinidad. That's not the enemy, right? And so this is why we have these disconnects. And we tend to fall to this low energy place of making enemies out of our own people and trying to compare who's the better sufferer, right? Who's the more exceptional slave, which is just silliness, right? Hey, what's up? Peace out. Shout out to Kevin Care 42. He's a photographer. You guys should check out his channel. Kevin Care 42. If you're interested, drop your by the way, I have to call you back too. I saw you call me earlier. But drop your your Instagram or your YouTube or whatever. Whatever you're comfortable with here for folks to check out. Right? I like to have people check out fly black folks that I encounter as well. All right, so continue. Race aside, Arabs of North Africa are distinguished from the rest of contemporary Mediterranean Europe by their Islamic culture. However, almost half of the population of the rest of Africa could be identified with this Islamic culture. Moreover, the same Islamic movement which swept the Arab world was responsible for Islamizing half of Africa south of the Sahara. This has given rise to the theory of unidirectional movements of ideas and influences between North and Sub-Saharan Africa. This theory holds that the Islamic influence moved from north to south across the Sahara, that the conquering Islamic leaders influenced Sub-Saharan Africa, but were little influenced by the people with whom they came into contact, that the only northward movement resulted from Arab traffic in black slaves who were transported across the desert by caravan routes. The great flourishing commerce between the peoples on both sides of the Sahara Desert before Europe came of age either has been forgotten or attributed solely to the Arabs. It is rarely conceded that the peoples south of the Sahara had values, ideas, and institutions to support a level of civilization that could have influenced those who traveled between the great civilizations that actually flourished in the Western Sudanic empires of Borno, Kanem, Songhai, Ghana, and Mali, and the Egyptian and other North African civilizations. The myth grew, and with it, the perception creating the permanent separation between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Although the Great Sahara Divide had never prevented the movement of peoples, ideas, and commerce across it, we have inherited this myth of a perfect Saharan barrier between North Africa and the rest of Africa. With the myth grew the perception of distinct and irreconcilable religious, cultural, political, and social identities for North Africa and Africa south of the Sahara. In the chat room, we got Kevin Care 42. He's letting you guys know his main YouTube is NYC Beauties. One word, NYC Beauties. Y'all go and check it out. Some real dope photography with black women, beautiful black women. Go and check it out. All right. To continue, the view of Africa inherent in the historical notion of the Dark Continent carries a racial connotation. Let me read that again. The view of Africa inherent in the historical notion of the Dark Continent carries a racial connotation. This implicit racial factor can be linked with the sub-Saharan African identity. Sub-Saharan Africa is often identified as Black Africa, and Black Africa belongs to Black Africans. This has given rise to the problem that no definition of Africa can be purified of its racial implications. All early historical accounts of Africa leave the distinct impression that the continent is largely inhabited by Negroes. In contemporary terminology, it means that Africa belongs to the Black race. And, you know, I used to work with a guy, I think I mentioned this one time before, I used to work with a guy from Morocco. And I remember him, and he was older than me too, I remember him saying to me, you know, in Black Africa, and I was looking at this dude like, you know, these white folks don't look at you as quite white. You know, but that is the mentality, and that's your North Africa, you know, for you. That's your North Africa is Islamic folks, Islamic whites. That's their outlook on you, right? You just from Black Africa, right? With the implications being that they're from a better Africa, then, right? To continue. Unfortunately, this attempt to identify sub-Saharan Africa as black has been complicated by the white settler problem in Africa south of the Zambezi, Rhodesia, and the Republic of South Africa. The white presence within so-called sub-Saharan Africa has made it impossible for anyone to establish the intended coincidence between race and territoriality in contemporary Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa was distinguished from North Africa fundamentally on racial grounds. Black people occupied Africa south of the Sahara until Europeans came to settle in Kenya and southern Africa. In this view, Black Africa consists of the landmass between the Sahara Desert to the north and Rhodesia and apartheid South Africa to the south. Rhodesia is now Zimbabwe, by the way. Black Africa in this sense is Africa south of the Sahara and Africa north of the Zambezi. This is also the only way Africa can be defined racially. But such a definition not only makes nonsense of geographically based identities of the African, it also creates complications in dealing with South Africa and Rhodesia, where the overwhelmingly majority of the population is black. Just as Arabs in North Africa are not generally seen as Africans, white settlers in Africa do not regard themselves as Africans, although they realize and defend their physical presence on the African continent. The white settlers wish to maintain and project a Euro-Caucasian identity by identifying their culture as a historically necessary spatial extension of European civilization. In the chat room, I see a little bit more activity. What's going on now? Kevin Care 42 says, did you hear about the ANC putting a Chinese born, in their parliament in South Africa? Her name is Jaume Harvard. Yeah, I did hear about that, and I shook my head about it too. Thanks for bringing that up. How many of you heard about that? How South Africa, just in their parliament, right, their governing body, right, they put some Chinese-born individual into their parliament. Now, you see, this is where you really got to understand power, and most importantly, you got to understand what happens when you lack power. You also got to understand that, look, a lot of these, as it's currently constructed, a lot of these so-called African leaders will sell out Africa. And in doing so, sell out the Africans. And we've talked about this on the show a lot in the past. I don't want to keep repeating myself all the time, but the fact of the matter is it comes down to who, how, and where they were educated. These guys are educated, and the education that they're getting tears them from their African tradition, tears them from their communities. They are not patriotic leaders, right? They're about the almighty dollar, right? Cutting their little deals with Chinese and all this kind of stuff. Once you open up your governing body, your parliament, right, to some foreign-born, Chinese person, well, it's downhill from there. It's downhill from there. What do you think that Chinese person is going to do? Like, whose interest do you think they're in that parliament for? You think they're working for the interests of the people who look like me, you, Kevin Kerr, Daily Affirmations by Pauline? Hell no. Hell no. And I was just about to say it's time for the African leaders, but forget that. It's time for the African people, right, in all the countries across the continent. It's time for those folks to start getting smarter now. We've been going through this type of shit for too long. It's time to get smarter now, right? And by the way, I see where some you foundational Black Americans and whatnot, you look down your noses at Africa for stuff like this. Let me tell you all something. The only reason why that's not happening to y'all is because you're in America. Let's make that really clear, just to quote Kamala Harris, right? It's your proximity. It's your being a population within a nation is what protects you from that type of stuff. If you are out there somewhere on your own, you'll be going through the same shit, right? Take Liberia, for example, right? We got to remember who we are, right? And we got to have a thirst, really. We got to build a thirst within ourselves to want to be free, right? To want to be able to stand up with your back straight, your head up, and be able to do what you want to do, to create, to self-actualize, etc. Right? When you don't want to do that, and that's what I see from most Africans, wherever it is, in the States, the Caribbean, wherever. Folks are kind of good just going along with whatever the elected folks say. Right? Then there'll be a point, 2 years before the general election, you'll complain a bunch, right? The guys who want to get into power will rile you up, right? But then you're going to repeat the same shit over and over and over. There has to come a point where you want to see better for yourselves and your children and your people going forward. It just has to come to that point. Right now, the African leadership doesn't see it. And again, that's why the education has to change. Change the minds of the youth who are coming up, who are going to fill those roles in the future, right? And then you'll see the difference. Until then, nothing will change. In the chat room, Kevin Kerr 42 says, look at how the Malaysian came to Madagascar and within generations had many mixed kids. Yeah, the Chinese are doing the same shit. China, in fact, what I understood a couple years ago, Chinese actually will go into Africa and impregnating African women and bouncing. Right? Bouncing. Come on, people. You don't need a patriotic leader to tell you that's probably a bad idea, right? But we got to start orienting our people to make the sensible moves, and that comes through the education. To continue, the Arabs, on the other hand, have begun to conceive of their identity in somewhat different terms. This has created the problem of multiple collective identities and ambivalence on the part of those most affected. Since 1963, the North African countries have accepted membership in the OAU. Earlier, the ferment to identify them with African began at the 1955 Bandung Conference on the Third World, Africa and Asia. It continued through the All African Peoples Conference in 1957 to 1960, and was made tangible in the Casablanca bloc, goddamn, which is Ghana, Guinea, Mali, Morocco, the UAR, and Algeria in 1961. Both the Casablanca bloc and its predecessor, the Union of African States, again, Ghana, Guinea, and Mali in 1960, had the distinction of being the first concrete, formal, intra-African political organizations to cut across the language barrier between French and English-speaking Africa and the physical historical barrier symbolized by the Sahara Desert. White settlers in Africa continue to identify themselves as non-Africans, precisely because their identity is racially determined and consummated in the white supremacist philosophy. Right? Meanwhile, y'all out here not trying to be Africans, right? This brings us to the heart of the issue. Through a set of psychological, historical, and racial factors, Africa, despite her racial mixture, has generally been identified exclusively with black people. The socially operative definition of Africa, in other words, is racially determined and inexorably linked with the black man. Indeed, the assertion that Africa belongs to Africans means in all simplicity that Africa belongs to its black population. See, that's a thing too, right? You can say that, but you have to protect that too. You can't just say Africa for the Africans, but don't protect that. Once these other people figure out, wait, hold on, wait a minute, there's resources to go here and pimp out? Well, no. I mean, Africa can't just be for Africans. It just can't be for black people, right? We don't go in there as who we are, Chinese, Belgians, French or whatever, and we gonna wreak havoc as we exploit the place. You gotta protect what you say you are. When I had the conversation with Obadel Cambone some time ago, and I know the audio for that episode isn't the greatest, but I checked it out the other day. You guys can still go and listen to that and get something from it. Stop it. All right? That interview should have higher numbers than what it has. Right? Yeah, the sound is a little janky, but go ahead and listen to it. There's still jewels you can get from that episode. Right? And one of the things he mentioned was how Kemet was named so because it means the land of the black people, which was to tell everyone around at that time, in that present and in our future, right, that this is the land for black people. It's telling you who's supposed to be there. And the next thing you got to do is you got to protect that. You have to protect that. In the chat room, I see Kevin Kerr says, I predict the black youths of Africa will rise up against these corrupt leaders. That's if, really and truly, that's if they get the right knowledge. They don't get the right knowledge. They come up to the same systems that their current leaders come up through. They're going to be looking to do the same things that their current leaders have done, right? The intercession that needs to go on in Africa is to break the chains of the education and to give those African youth some wins along the way. I talked about this in the past. Right? When you get the right education that teaches you how to solve your own problems, and you actually get to work through your problems and win and conquer some of those problems, then yeah, they will overthrow, these goofballs who are African leaders. And by African leaders, I'm not just talking about the continent, I'm talking about the Caribbean too. Right? They will do that, but it's imperative they get the right knowledge. And truth be told, as we saw with like the Haitian Revolution and stuff like that, even if they get to see another group of Africans, right, again, on the continent or throughout the world, if they get to see another group of Africans who do it, who overthrow, the Watless leadership, then indeed, the African youth will do the same. And that's why, again, you gotta push Pan-Africanism, and not just push it in words, but push it in deeds. We gotta connect our people. We have to be interconnected to know who's doing the work where, how far are they getting with it, what's their strategy, what has worked, what hasn't worked. We're not really having those dialogues. We're not really having those dialogues across the diaspora. And by the way, the powers that be, they want it that way. I'm not saying that they have all the power in the world to stop it, but they want it that way. And we seem to play into it all the time, over and over again. To continue, before I continue, make sure you guys like the video, give it a thumbs up, share it with those people you think might be interested in it, and also click the bell. The bell is the important part. The bell lets you know when I am on again, or when I have uploaded new content. Before I continue, what's funny, how YouTube works. Like, I did this rant a couple of weeks ago about this situation on this podcast that I like to watch called the Corey Holcomb 5150 show. And that 20-minute rant has maybe the top 2 or 3 numbers on any episode of the show I've ever done. Now, it just shows you how our folks like entertainment. But the crazier part is, like, through that, I've gotten maybe 40 subs in that time. How many people click the bell, I'm not sure. But it just goes to show you what the general focus is. Right? The second follow-up video to that must be 400 or 500 views or something like that as well, right? And it just goes to show, like, if what's crazy, right? If I was to go the entertainment route, right? If I was to do the comic books or the TV shows or whatever, I'll be getting numbers. I'll be getting some decent numbers, right? But this stuff that I'm talking about is difficult, right? This stuff that I'm talking about is difficult. It's hard to hear, right? It's just easier to deal with the beefs or the scandals or the TV shows or whatnot. And that's very telling. I see a comment in the comment section. I'll get to it right. 1 minute. Let me see if I could get to my Discord. This Discord, for some reason, sluggish sometimes. I guess too many resources are being used. But I want to get the invite link. And I know I could use a longer link. I know I could extend the time on the link, but I like to keep it at a day right now. So it's a 24-hour link, and I like to keep it that way because it allows me right now to monitor who cometh and who goeth, right, from the Discord. So click that link right there, join the Discord, where we talk more about the curriculum, and of course there's access to the shows, etc. on the Discord. All right, in chat room, Kevin Care42 says, one thing many of our people don't see is their value. We have so much talent, but we'll take cues from outsiders. This has to stop. We are great people, and that's nothing but the truth right there. We are a great people. Even when we're sabotaged, we come back and we do great things. And that's not just here in America, that's in the Caribbean, that's in the UK, that's on the continent itself. People don't talk about it, but like when the French was getting up out of so you know, some of those African countries, those guys tore up whole infrastructure. They tore up the plumbing, buildings, sidewalks. They tore everything, electrical. They just tore every shit up. They were not going to walk out there, right, with this technology, right, with these you know, things going for you. They tore it down. Africans still came back and built it back up, right? So it's not just one group of Africans who've done it. We've all done it. We have value. You know, we're talented. If we were left alone, Africa would be way ahead probably of every peoples on the earth. But we weren't left alone. We were too trusting, and we allowed these people to put us in a bad place now. I always tell people, like, in a fight, if you let a guy blow you out in a fight, or you know, a girl blow you out in a fight, that person who blows you out in a fight, they might do anything to you after they beat you. You get knocked down and sprawled out in front of an opponent out here in the streets, they might do you anything in life. I've talked about this, I'm sure, long ago on the show. There's an episode of Oz, you know, that prison show on HBO that was pretty graphic. Dude, there was a scene where there was a character, a black guy, you didn't even think he was on no bullshit like that. He knocked out this white kid, boogered him right there. Like, that's the thing we have to understand about the world. You let people conquer you, man, they might do you anything after they conquer, and you might never really be able to come back. At least no time soon. You know, at least no time soon. I see I get a greetings from Abalabala. Abalabala, is this your first time here? If it is, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when I'm on again. Daily Affirmations by Pauline says, I say the same thing. We say we want positivity and enlightenment, but the numbers show true interests lie in entertainment, whether positive or negative. Absolutely. All right. Abalabala says at Daily Affirmation by Pauline, it's really bad. Yeah, we gotta, you know, that's something we gotta really take stock of. And, you know, part of it is, folks, again, entertainment is easy. You know, entertainment is really easy. You know, to watch some bullshit entertainment is, you know, is nothing. It takes nothing. It's, you know, like I heard a preacher say one day, a dead thing could flow down a river, right? A dead thing can flow down a river. You have to be a living thing to go against the current. And a lot of our people, they act like a dead thing. You see? Because it's just easy. You just go with the flow, right? Kevin Care 42 says, one thing from listening to your past podcasts is that Black African have a high tempo spirit. Whatever we touch turns golden. When you constantly prune a tree, it does not grow. When a tree is left alone, it grows. Yeah, absolutely. And so what does that tell us? That tells us that we gotta set up a way to be left alone. And that comes with power. We gotta build power. When you build power, people don't much mess with you, right? To continue. And by the way, before I continue, I just want to thank all y'all for being here with me on a Saturday night, listening to the reading of this paper. I appreciate everyone who's here. The implications of this assertion are serious. Africa becomes the only continent in which there is a coincidence between her geographical continental designation and the collective identity of a Black population. No other continent has imposed such a degree of collective identity on her peoples. Thus, while Africa, as a geographical entity, enjoys a greater perpetual unity than any other continent, Africa as a political or cultural entity has the least unified image of any. Yeah, you could be black all you want and go to Germany. They don't recount you as German like that. This image and its projection reveal the fact that more often than not, it is the people and not the geographical entity that those who speak of Africa have in mind. In the case of Southern Africa, the assertion that Africa belongs to its black population denies legitimacy to the white settlers who are regarded as usurpers and exploiters who have no right to the land. There is immense psychological and ideological value in denying legitimacy to all white settlers in Southern Africa. First, the settlers have never identified themselves with Africa, although they are physically present there and have no other home. Second, boy, that's an interesting point, right? You're in the land. You don't identify, which I'm fine with, but y'all don't have no other home. Yet you refuse to identify. Second, the settlers' self-identification makes it easy for the African revolutionaries to view them as occupation forces who will someday be defeated. The settlers' supremacist philosophy and their consequent refusal to allow minimal accommodation with Africans reinforce this denial of legitimacy to the settlers' claim to any part of Southern Africa. Third, such a denial sustains the revolutionary spirit of the black Africans living in this milieu of hideous oppression in Southern Africa. The revolutionary in Southern Africa breeds defiance and lays absolute claim to moral rightness. I heard a grifter in Black Society talking the other day how if you take blacks from the U.S. and give them access to the resources in the continent, they would quote unquote get it popping. Let me tell y'all something. That's nonsense. Let me absolutely tell y'all something. That's not. If you think that, then you don't understand geopolitics. If you think that, you don't understand geopolitics. And by the way, how could you go somewhere else and get it popping and you're not getting it popping here? Such revolutionary or liberationist sentiment has also been reflected in the Pan-African movement. It has been reflected further in the search of the African personality and the search for the black essence, which gave rise to negritude. Strangely enough, primarily because of African humanism, the claim that Africa belongs to its black population has not produced an unbridled continental hatred for white people. Let me read that one more time, and this is part of the problem. Strangely enough, primarily because of African humanism, the claim that Africa belongs to its black population has not produced an unbridled continental hatred for white people. You guys know my thoughts to that statement. You could post yours in the chat room. All right. I see KW Dawn 7 is in the room. Peace to you, brother. KW Dawn 7 usually comes with the greeting, Sawabona. Peace to you, brother. I appreciate you being here as you are most times. Anyway, much love. Right? So you guys know my feeling about this statement. What's your feeling towards this statement that, strangely enough, primarily because of African humanism, the claim that Africa belongs to its black population has not produced an unbridled continental hatred for white people? The African still retains, what's going on here? The African still retains a sense of, okay, that's weird. Are themselves incapable of thinking in terms of racial accommodation. That's weird. Since 1960, Africa has continually participated in peaceful attempts to forge continental and regional unity. Of course, the impetus for this collective identity was drawn from non-African sources, much of it from Europe. Boom. Because the collective identity that was imposed was essentially negative and dehumanizing, the Africans, upon regaining their lost freedom, have had to emphasize their Africanness, or as Carter put it, quote, the compulsion towards the concept African. This emphasis affirms the belief that the cluster of particular characteristics which define the African personality transcends geographical boundaries. Collective humiliation under colonialism has been partially responsible for the collective efforts of the African leaders, at least to cooperate in opposing the intrusion of outside powers. The sentiment was captured in the philosophy of non-alignment in African foreign policies. Whatever the limitations of the Pan-African consciousness and collective identity to which it has given birth, the fact remains that there have been greater attempts at achieving political consensus and coordination of policies in Africa as a continent since independence than in any other continent at any time in history. I want you guys to chew on that last statement. I'm going to take a quick station ID break. I'll be back on the other side to continue reading this paper.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And we're back. Make sure to check out those shows as well as the Queen's Council on KWAZ Radio. I was thinking about it during the station ID as I was sipping some water. It's remarkable. I know it's a small group, but I appreciate the small group anyway. I appreciate the small group that I usually have, but solid people who come through and check out my live streams on a regular basis. Folks like KW Don 7, Daily Affirmations by Pauline, etc. And I was thinking, it's Saturday. You guys could be doing so much other things right now, so I appreciate you. But I want to issue this challenge to some of you. Some of you have spouses, some of you have families, some of you have a significant other, like a girlfriend, boyfriend, or whatever. And I want to challenge you guys and say, hey, it'll be cool if you guys bring in your significant others to listen to the show. You could listen to it all together on one source, or you can split it up and listen separately, but at the same time. If you get my meaning. And it'll be nice to hear what some of your conversations after an episode airs, like what kind of conversations does listening to one of my episodes really bring you in the future, right? So you guys let me know how that works out. But that's my challenge to you guys. Bring in your families or your significant others, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, and let me know in future broadcasts what kind of conversations sprung up between yourselves after listening to an episode of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I see KV is in the chat room. I don't know if I've ever seen KV before. KV says, I don't know why not. It should be like that. And I think KV is responding to that notion that Africans don't hold contempt for whites, Africans all across the continent, because of their humanism, their concept of humanism, don't hold contempt for whites all across. I agree with KV. KV, if you're new here, let me know. Or let us know, those who are live on on his live stream right now. Let us know if you're new here, and if you are new here, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to hit the like button on the video and share it with those that you think would like to hear this type of content. KW Don 7 says, to paraphrase John Henry Clark, Azania, these white folks, won't be free. I'm sorry, Azania won't be free until the blood of Urugu run throughout the land. So Azania, I'm sorry, it's our people, won't be free until the blood of Urugu run throughout the land. And I cannot disagree, right? Because if we were doing that to them, that's how they would look at it, right? KW Don goes on to say, the FBA ADOS has had the most access to liquidity and have not carved out anything within the belly of the beast and are still on the hamster wheel of begging for reparations. Ah, man, put that on a shirt, underdog. I like that. And again, this is not to put down our, Africans in America, but the idea is to, like, bring that down a little bit. Humble yourself. Let's get together. Let's work this out and let's do some shit. Right? You guys have had proximity, right, to what these folks have been doing out here in the States. And you're complaining about other Africans coming here trying to get a little access, right? You're complaining about that, and then you want to lie and somehow tell yourselves that, well, if we had gone to Africa, we would get a puppet. No, you won't. Doesn't work that way, right? Okay, this one says begging for reparations, complaining about racism, white supremacy. KV says, hello, brother and family. Yes, I am new. Thank you. Yeah, KV, I tend to remember, but again, we have a small group that shows up on a regular basis. I tend to remember people who have been here before. Sometimes I have to squint to remember certain people, right? But you didn't seem familiar. I appreciate you stopping through. Join the Discord, guys. If you're interested, if you like the show, you want to, participate, helping the podcast to be bigger, or what have you, or to be more far-reaching, jump on the Discord, say, yo, I'm here as a podcast fan, I want to help the podcast, or what have you. Or if you know about the project that we're working on with African-centered curriculum, and you feel that you could have some keen input into African-centered curriculum, jump on and say, hey, I'm here to be a writer on the curriculum, all right? To continue now with the paper. Positive claims notwithstanding, the assertion that Africa belongs only to its black population interferes with African solidarity, which is here being defined continentally. People in North Africa are not black. Hence, if Africa belongs only to black people, then either Africa must geographically begin from south of the Sahara, thereby taking their continental identity from the Arab and black Sudanese, or the present citizens of North Africa will have to be dislodged to make room for a northward expansion of black Africa. And OKW Don 7 would like this section right here. So would I. The latter alternative is patently improbable. The former has been rejected, at least ideologically. Hence, North Africans have partially accepted the definition of themselves as Africans, and they have been accepted as Africans, but the black ethos continues to dominate the collective identity of Africa and the Africans. So they make a point there. I talked about Gaddafi earlier. Gaddafi referred to themselves mostly as Arabs, but there are times you could catch them saying, we Africans or whatever, right? But again, most of that stuff was game, right? Those guys, at the end of the day, they're looking out for their Arabs, right? They're looking out for Arabs. The fundamental assertion that black peoples are the only authentic Africans affects events even beyond the shores of Africa. The institutions of slavery and slave trade imperialism, and colonialism have created a black diaspora over Europe and the Americas. But the identity with Mother Africa has never been completely broken or forgotten. White racism shares the responsibility for the particular form of the survival of this overseas black collective identity with Mother Africa. White racism's persistent refusal to allow black people in the New World any equitable or proportionate participation in predominantly white societies as free men has nursed the nostalgia of black peoples for Mother Africa. Black people everywhere have been subjugated, exploited, and dispossessed. Whether in Mother Africa or the New World, black people have assimilated experiences which have produced varying degrees of social alienation and psychological rejection. We're seeing a lot of that now today, this psychological rejection. Some of you folks rather think of yourselves as Native Americans and all this such shit here, right? The emotional or subjective thrust makes some aspects of the Black revolutionary movement in America understandable to blacks in Africa. The revolution looks both inward to black achievements in the New World and outward to Mother Africa, thus creating a dual identity that will simultaneously or ultimately lead to a rediscovery of self. Put in proper perspective, this introspective turn is in itself a significant revolution. One of the black man's greatest enemies has been the self-alienation and his psychological self-division. A major battle will have been won when this self-division is completely conquered. How do you guys feel about that line right there? A major battle will have been won when this self-division is completely conquered. Type 1 in the chat if you agree with that statement. Type 2 if you don't. Right? By the way, KV, where did you learn about the podcast? Right? Type 1 if you agree with that statement. Type 2 if you don't. Right? To continue. Black self-acceptance, embodied in the slogan "Black is beautiful," became a necessary precondition of the acceptance of the black man by whites or any other black peoples. This self-acceptance is an inevitable requirement for the success of black liberation in America and elsewhere. It would mean the transformation of the proclamation, "I am black and I am beautiful," into a permanent state of black being. The outward look toward Africa has begun to clarify the essence of the Black revolutionary movement. Black pride in the African past and in the regeneration of the Black personality, Black culture, and Black world experience has added a functional purpose to regaining lost Black self-assurance. The relationship between Black Americans and Black Africans will crystallize more and more as the issues are defined and as mature judgment supplants emotional idolization of poorly conceived African values and practices. The Black African does not suffer from the pervasive self-alienation and self-negation that characterize the consciousness of the Black American. This goes far to explain why Africans are not preoccupied with the glories buried deep in ancient Africa. Black Africa is in search of a positive identity that will eclipse her own image of historical subjugation. But the psychological damage resulting from that subjugation is not as extensive as that suffered by Black Americans over more than 300 years of systematic dehumanization, deculturation, and de-Africanization. The difference in the degree of the experience of subjugation does not diminish sense of common purpose that exists between Black Africans and Black Americans. By the way, I want to address something real quick. You hear a lot of the ADOS FBA groups talking about having been criticized for not having a culture. And I know, I've heard Caribbean folks say stuff like that too. The reality of it is, though, what most people are really getting at is, and it's still not absolutely true, but a lot of these folks are looking at them coming from the continent, for example, and seeing something different, a watered down version because of the dehumanization, the deculturalization, etc., right? And they're saying that, well, you don't have the culture that we have, right? You're black, we're from the continent, but you don't really have that culture. Now, again, if you take time and you study what's going on, you study, like, especially like the Black South, you'll see the African influence. In fact, in one of these upcoming episodes, I'm going to really talk about the Gullah Geechee people. And I'm going to talk about them in particular because they relate to me and where I'm from. And the Gullah Geechee people, I mean, really have African culture going on, right? But of course, it's mixed in with their contact with Europeans. So no one's putting folks down here per se that you don't have a culture. It's obvious you have a culture. And it's obvious, like, hip-hop and all this stuff is a part of the culture, right? But I think what most people are trying to say is, like, yo, there's a disconnect in the culture that you have now because of the things that I just read off from the paper, from the original culture that we come from. There's Africa, the continent, there's the Caribbean, and then there's a toss-up between the UK and America. I'll probably say America is next, and then the UK probably has the least amount of African culture. But that's really what's being said, but you're being manipulated into thinking people are hating on you, and people are putting you down. That's not what's happening. That's not what's happening. People are just pointing out that the culture, there's a gap in cultures, and it's for the reasons I just read off. In the chat room, I got a couple of ones from folks, so most people in the room agree with that, with the sentiment of what was said in the paper there. KW Don 7 said, I just shared the live stream to some of my Facebook groups. Much appreciated. That's what I like. Much appreciated. The more people this gets out to, the more chance of this and the other shows on the podcast network of actually doing something big for the people in the future, right? KV says, I'm subscribed to you. I think I'd seen a video of yours that prompted me to subscribe. Well, I appreciate you subscribing. And if you click the bell, then you'll know exactly when I have new content posted or being live streamed, so you can hop on again. It's nice to have your company here today. Kevin Kerr says, I had a white woman and an Asian woman. Oh, okay. I thought this was going to be something else just now. I had a white woman and an Asian woman tell me that I should photograph other races of women instead of my own. They hate when we are concentrating on our own. Yeah, they absolutely hate it. Didn't I hear Sway talk about that one time? Actually, Sway was telling a black dude. Yeah. Sway was telling this black musician, I can't remember which one it was, right? That, maybe because his music just focuses on black women or something, you're alienating yourself. And it was just a bunch of hoe-ass coon talk. Maybe you're alienating yourself from other women's and stuff. I just Sway, shut up. KW Don 7 says ADOS leadership are doing movies reviews and FBI complaining about what Jim Crow Joe Biden isn't doing for them. Yeah, that's and that's the hamster wheel that we get on, right? It's and really, and I know KW Don 7 knows this. Really, all that stuff that they're doing, really and truly, is to get this tight knit customer base. So when they put out their DVDs, their Ogun spray, you ain't African, but you're out here selling Ogun juice, right? The T-shirts and all that kind of stuff. It's a hustle again, right? It's a grift, you know. And it's so sad that we have so many people falling for the grift, you know. These hustlers, just for the almighty dollar, can throw the concept of Pan-Africanism back, you know, back generations now. All because you're out here trying to hustle for a dollar. Or trying to get a job with the Democrats or jobs with the, you know, with the Republicans or whatever. It's just madness. But to continue. Black racial identity has been sanctioned and hallowed by the history of black suffering. This collective identity has been asserted in the most current definition of the African, which says that, quote, all black people everywhere are Africans. Problems are bound to follow upon this new identity. For example, one, the distinction it fails to make for ideological reasons between black Africans and black Americans and other Africans in the diaspora, any distinction among Europeans being irrelevant. Two, its complete ideological disregard for the realities of nationality, citizenship, and patriotism in the nation state. And three, the social, cultural, and psychological effects of prolonged socialization on the molding of the character, values, and personality of the individual. In these regards, the recent definition is an affront to many critical ideas and values which constitute the coordinates of contemporary world order. If acted upon, this new identification may clarify the content of all collective black-white relationships. However, there is little likelihood that it will reveal or clarify the inner conflicts and tensions that centuries of differential socialization have built into the black world experience. It is also in danger of complicating the relationships among black peoples by concealing the implications of the differential levels of social aspirations and consciousness to be seen among black people in far-flung geographical locations. It should be recognized that collective black identity does not mean that all black people everywhere share the same values, goals, and destinies. All may share in the struggle for liberation, but its content varies from one social system to another. Black peoples of the world have different planes of consciousness, as well as different environmental and existential necessities. I like that. Therefore, after the new identification has been stripped of its emotional content, it is seen to stand in the way of clear analysis. Since 1969, for example, there have been several meetings of the Congress of African Peoples, a body which is composed almost entirely of black Africans. This misleading nomenclature has led some black American scholars to speak of African philosophy and the like when they actually meant the experience peculiar to black Americans. In analysis, we cannot escape reference to black Africans, black Americans, or black people in the diaspora if we intend to communicate specific information about specific people in specific geographical areas. To refuse to recognize the analytic utility of such distinctions is to cause more confusion that is warranted, not only in social discourse, but also in the intersubjective communication of ideas. If one is referring to black Americans only, or black people in the West Indies only, or black people in Europe only, it should be stated it should be so stated. To say that one is talking about Africans when one is actually speaking about black people in the United States is either deliberately to misinform one's audience or to cause unnecessary confusion. Analytic precision is too important to be sacrificed on the altar of collective emotionalism. Moreover, the ideological closure of the distinction between black peoples in Africa and those in the New World certainly raises another practical problem. What aspects of Mother Africa can black Americans, copy or revive to advantage? Is one an African because one wears the dashiki, or agbada, or buba? Is one an African because one walks barefoot in the city streets, or because one wears some mysteriously looking beads around the neck? Does a man become an African because he pierces his ears and wears an earring in one ear? Does one become an African by wearing an afro hairdo, or by plaiting one's hair in the traditional African way? What does it really mean for the black American to become African? Does he become an African by practicing voodoo or ancient cults? These are hard questions that are not raised to be answered here. They are raised to provoke thought on the part of those who are searching for the authentic African experience. What do you guys thought about this? There's a series of questions being asked here. And as you guys respond with what your thoughts are on this here, my thing is that we're not looking to be superficially African, right? There are things in the superficial that we want to kind reclaim and kind of normalize, right? Like why would it be weird for me to wear African garb, let's say, to a business meeting? It's my culture. Why should I be wearing your, Italian shoes or whatever? That's your culture, right? So I don't think it's about the superficial so much as immersing yourself, right, in the knowledge, in the tradition of, your choice of African peoples to resonate with, right? But what are your thoughts? Type them in the comment section. I'll read them live on the air. The cultural and ideological return of black Americans to their African roots should and must be selective if it is to be meaningful. For one thing, black Americans have been divorced from Africa for nearly 400 years. For another, a return to 13th, 14th, and 15th century Africa, no matter how exhilarating or liberating, can never substitute for mastering the requirements and challenges of a modern technological age. It is not easy to escape the ambivalence of the black American. His experience tend to compel him to disown the only land and culture he has known. And it is not certain that he really does not love America. It seems that it is his alienation from her that he really hates. Even if he were to disown America, how much of Africa, of which he may not have much knowledge, can he claim? Such an existential dilemma could torture souls made of iron. Temptations for romanticizing are omnipresent and add greatly to the black American's burden. And yet the road to true political and economic salvation does not lie in the realm of myth and illusion. So there's a couple things that you can really break down there. That, number one, at the base of black American culture is African tradition. So you haven't been totally divorced of Africa for 400 years. You've been separated from the land. That's true, right? And again, no one's telling you, you know, you could have some pride in where you're from, right? But understand at the end of the day, you're an African. And so your daily endeavor should be to get closer to, you know, your African self. Like I mentioned before, there's too much technology out here now where you could go and do a test and you could go do a test and figure out, you know, from AfricanAncestry.com and figure out, you know, who were your peoples? Where did your peoples come from? And then start to just get in there and start to learn about yourself through those people. If you've been following us for a while, you know that we read these African myth and folk tales and stuff like that, right? And in those stories, you could break it down and get to learn all about the geography of the people, the social studies of the people, the traditions, etc. You know, we read Proverbs. Go sit down and read some Proverbs from the people that you come from. Go sit down and learn, you know, how to say hello or goodbye, or how to count numbers and do your alphabets, or go learn some recipes from the place. It's like in the chat room, Kevin Care42 says, it's a mindset. Go and get it yourself into the mindset. KW Don 7 says, our default position as African people is what Khalid Muhammad taught. Support what your enemy opposes and oppose what your enemy supports. Beautifully said. I had forgotten that quote from him, but beautifully said. Your enemy opposes Africa. Your enemy does everything to get you not to return, not to even visit, right? Then go ahead and do it. Visit, support it, be it. It's a mindset, right? To continue. The need of contemporary Black consciousness to forge a direct link between past and present cannot be denied. It is that link in its positive aspects that makes possible a healthy vision of the decent future. It must, however, be borne in mind that no modern man can live successfully in the past except through self-delusion. To the degree that a return to their African roots helps Black Americans to restore their self-pride, dignity, and self-acceptance, it will be a happy homecoming. But to the degree that Black historicism Black historicism incapacitates Black Americans to respond and adjust to demands of modern living, it will be a liability. Listen, the idea is this. We know that Pan-Africanism is the way that we need to go. And you and I, not being directly from the continent, we need to immerse ourselves in some African traditions, languages, etc., etc. Because we need to be able to understand from a psychological level, right, how to deal with, from a social level, with our brothers and sisters from the continent. That's just the reality. That's just, and by the way, they need to do something similar as well. They too need to look at, you know, Black American culture or Caribbean culture and look and see, oh, you know, those are the things that you do that we do. That comes from us, right? That comes from the source. And so that's what it really comes down to, right? We're not doing this just so that we could live, you know, in hopes that we could live in the modern world. That's not what it's for. All right? So continue. The danger can be stated simply. Contemporary Black Africa is oriented towards the future. As the late Tom Mboya of Kenya once argued, poverty and unhygienic living conditions, in brackets, the image of the true African walking barefoot, are not part of African uniqueness, nor should it be expected that Africans will perpetuate such conditions. The good intentions of Black Americans are not sufficient to safeguard them through that journey back into ancient Africa. In any case, much of the homecoming has been romanticized, emotionalized, intellectualized, and mythologized. Unless selective judgment is strenuously applied, Black Americans may well face the danger of a second historical alienation as damaging as that of slavery. Come on. By dwelling too long in ancient Africa, they may alienate themselves from the new and dominant Africa, neither ancient nor Europeanized, which by choice is marching with giant steps into the future. Moreover, Black Americans may be left behind in America, their physical home. Alienation from neo-African culture and ethos, coupled with self-imposed alienation at home, is a possibility, especially given the idolization of all that is Black, which has emerged from some Black revolutionary ideologies. Quote, Black is beautiful has become virtually identical with, quote, all that is Black is praiseworthy. Therein lies the problem. The signs of this potentially profound alienation are all around us. We have already mentioned the ambivalence of the Black American towards his country, an ambivalence which forces him to exist in a state of love-hate in relation both to the country and to many of its people. Then there is the vast difference between the mythologized Africa invented by the average Black American through vicarious experiences not usually based on first-hand knowledge, and the real Africa, which many Blacks have wished and found alienating in many respects. Black Africans who have visited African universities, for example, have found that they could hardly study there. Many decide that the educational system is too exacting or irrelevant, not only to their own needs, but to the needs of the African peoples themselves. Blacks who have visited Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and Tanzania usually find a level of elitism in African universities and urban areas with which they feel most comfortable. What do you guys think about that? To me, that just signals that Africans are messing up too, and that their education system is not doing the work it should be doing. But to say that should be some heralding sign of maybe we shouldn't connect with folks on the continent is just rubbish, right? In the chat room, KV says, for me, what I would say is that African people worldwide, knowledge of history and self, and any personal efforts are directed to my people and are my priority. And are my priority and where my loyalties lie. Yeah, knowledge of history and self and any personal efforts are directed to my people and are my priority and where my loyalties lie. And that's exactly it. To find excuses, and which is what the author has kind of turned this into, right? To find excuses not to unite is the problem that we have, right? Because you go, look, if you're from one place, eating certain foods, living a certain lifestyle, you go to another place. Is it immediate that you're just gonna love the food and love what they do? Nah, it's different. You have to become accustomed. But again, if you were being educated in an educational system that had you connecting more with the continent along the way, you wouldn't feel the way that this paper just expressed that some Africans in America feel about the continent. As a matter of fact, one of the first things that I saw that kind of uplifted me was Richard Pryor. How many of you are old enough to remember Richard Pryor talking about his first time going to Africa? If you go back and you look up, is that live on the Sunset Strip? No, I don't think it's live on the Sunset Strip. I can't remember which special it was. But Richard does a whole thing where he's talking about going back to Africa and feeling at home. He didn't feel like an N-word there. In fact, there was no N-words there. You can't tell me that's not the reality you'd face, especially if you were going through an education system that connected you with that motherland, right? To continue, others find that the African elites are cold or arrogant, sometimes because Black Americans are not welcomed as returning heroes when they first land in Africa. But why would you be a returning hero? Black Americans quickly translate this experience into a feeling of rejection by an alienation from the African. That's where you got to get out your emotions. Moreover, Black Americans are unable to identify with modern urban Africa, largely because it reminds them so much of the culture from which they are struggling to escape. The resulting reactive projection, which is a general aspect of culture shock, which is what I was going to say a second ago, has led many Black Americans, scholars among them, to suggest that authentic African culture is to be found in rural areas, among the peasants who have not been corrupted by the penetration of Western culture, education, modern industrial technology, and Christianity. This theory is a fantastic myth, and its social consequences could be so damaging as to create permanent alienation between Africans and Black Americans. Those Black Americans who have visited rural Africa, which is generally without running water, without electricity, without adequate transportation, and with poor health facilities, have either found it revolting and unlivable, or they have had to turn to the relics of dying practices and religions to salvage the unwarranted expectations they had invented about Africa. Anyway, it is viewed, the experience leads to grim alienation. Well, that tells me you didn't prepare yourself. And it also reminds me that the country that you prefer to adhere to is the country, or is among the countries, that has those conditions like that in Africa. And you're not taking that into consideration. The real shock is that no part of Africa has escaped alien penetration. Rural or urban penetration is a matter of degree. The average Black American can hardly survive in rural Africa. Listen to this. Even the African who has spent 5 or more years in Europe or America generally finds it difficult to live in or relate to rural Africa. Many Black Americans who visit Africa with the expectation of finding the impossible alienate the African host. Much of the problem arises from the inability of many Americans, Black and white, to adjust to alien cultures. The truth is that most Black Americans are aliens in Africa. They have typically American expectations. And that's it right there. You have an American taste now, right? But does that mean you forego your tradition? Come on. And they behave characteristically like Americans. Many expect Africa to adjust to them. That is why they expect Africa to change to accommodate them, while making very little effort to adapt to African ways of doing things, like I was saying. The Black African, sensing this attitude, tends to become hostile or diplomatically unfriendly. This is a serious problem of misperception on both sides, but the misperception is largely on the side of the Black American. After all, the African is at home in his own culture. It is the visitor who has to change. When Black Americans are thus identified as Americans in Africa, there results a crisis in their search for the Black identity in Africa. The Black African is often amused at the degree to which Black Americans are Americans in social, psychological orientation, and in value system. The Black African finds himself in a dilemma. He shares in the collective Black identity, but sometimes finds it difficult to share in healthy personal relationships with many individual Black Americans. This is unfortunately true of many Black Africans who are studying or working in the United States and who find themselves at odds with their Black American associates over standards of performance. Occasionally, the personality of the African student or scholar in America meshes better with the personalities of his white schoolmates and colleagues than with his Black counterparts. The African often feels frustrated in professional and personal relationships with his Black American colleagues, especially in competitive situations. The reasons for this are difficult to uncover, but some plausible explanations can be offered here. Before I get to these plausible explanations, what are your thoughts on this part of the paper so far? KW Don 7 in the chat room says he stopped using the N-word after visiting the continent. He had an epiphany. Yeah, that's Richard Pryor. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? There was a change in him, and I remember as a kid looking at this. I remember looking at his face, and you could tell how it hit him, right? Even back in America on stage, you could tell how it hit him to be on the continent. You could tell how it hit him, right? So again, again, this is where Pan-Africanism has failed, based on the most recent part of the paper I just read. You gotta keep in contact with your people, right? You gotta get to know your people, right? If my son leaves my presence for 20 years, after 20 years, we meet up again, I gotta get to know him. I have to learn him, right? He has to learn me somewhat too. And so if you want to be talking Pan-African, and this is the biggest failing I found with Pan-Africanism, haven't kept up with its people. You know? Give those Jews a round of applause, but actually hold off on a round of applause because they're getting serious financial aid from America, from American taxpayers, right? But they have those programs where, like in high school or something, all these Jewish kids go back to Israel. And because of the money that Israel gets in aid, they get to go to an Israel that's not some war-torn place. Like I have a friend who went to Israel and he told me, yo, that shit is like New York City. Our people have to understand, you're going back to Africa, don't expect New York City. For the most part, especially if you're going to rural parts of Africa. It just doesn't make sense. But our people in Africa have to understand, you're dealing with your relatives who have been gone for centuries. You got to walk them through it. Generally speaking, until the middle 1960s, most of the Black Africans who had worked or studied in American institutions of higher learning had been sheltered from direct exposure to the mainstream of the Black American way of life. Quite a large number of the Africans had come on government or government-related scholarships and had been sent to predominantly white colleges and universities where only privileged middle-class Black Americans could be found. Only in the last 10 years have predominantly Black colleges or universities been attracting a significant number of Black Africans. Because many of the Black colleges and universities are little known abroad, even when known, tend to have low academic ratings because they generally do not have access to the level of financial resources that could enable them to develop comprehensive international scholarship programs. These Black educational institutions have not been able to attract many Africans from the mother continent. And all these factors, the well-established and well-endowed, predominantly white institutions, right, PWIs, have held what amounts to a position of unassailed monopoly. Moreover, these white institutions and agencies like AAI, EIL, AID, ASPAU, SASPAU, and AFGRAD, and IIE, whatever those are, that channel African students and scholars to American universities, were least inclined to create suitable environments for exposing the African to the black mainstream in the U.S., where many of the Africans have come into contact with average black American students. The Africans have appeared to have more money to spend than the black Americans. This is some of the basis of Tone Talks stuff about, black Africans come to the United States more wealthier than black Americans, right? The Africans also seem more motivated, more serious, or more disciplined as students. All of these factors created tensions and even open hostility between Africans and black Americans here in the United States. White institutions have generally exploited the situation. Listen to that line right there. White institutions have generally exploited the situation to their advantage. Right? By displaying a large population of African students a few years ago, they gave the impression that colleges and universities were racially integrated. White teachers and students alike would boast of their black friends when they had the Africans in mind. Such a hypocritical attitude was not lost on black Americans, who came to resent both the Africans and the whites. In addition, when the black American has to work his way through college, his alienation from the affluent African is understandable. Although such tensions, conflicts, and frustrations between the two groups should not be overemphasized, neither should they be ignored. I agree with that. The gulf between the collective and individual identifications of black Africans and black Americans is a problem that has neither been fully recognized nor dealt with. The problem requires systematic analysis, especially for the sake of ideologically inclined black Americans. Such systematic analysis should not only disperse existing confusions, but should cultivate a more rational definition of the new black culture and the new African culture, both of which cannot exorcise permanent changes which involvement with European culture has wrought in them. The desire to forge a black collective identity gave birth to the black struggle, which in turn requires consensus to achieve its many objectives. But too often, consensus blurs into conformity that becomes the preserve of revolutionary movements. John Stuart Mill, in On Liberty, exposed the real danger of modern times. Individual liberty is seldom compatible with collective conformity. Contemporary black African revolutionary rhetoric is little inclined to recognize their claims or individual differences, nor does it easily accept that African interests differ from those of black Americans. Those who employ such faulty rhetoric, and by believing in it themselves, to insist on the same solutions for dissimilar problems is to compound existing crises. This is most unfortunate, especially because the collective goals of black Americans are sometimes defined either by a handful of self-appointed revolutionary leaders or by black leaders who have been foisted on the black community by the white establishments of businesses, government, media, and philanthropy. It is urged that greater attention be paid to black African interests, which will continue to be distinct from those of other black peoples in the diaspora. Man, after all, is a product of society, and any given society is a product of the peculiar processes of socialization and the collective force of its time-tested value system. The collective identity of black people everywhere can continue to serve as a basis for mutual cooperation and respect for the integrity and self-determination only if the inherent dilemmas are clearly understood. The new definition of the African creates new dilemmas even as it solves some ancient ones. That brings us to the end of the paper. My takeaway is that it's true that we have to understand that Africans in different regions and areas do face certain specific challenges, and you can't ignore those specific challenges. At the same time, that doesn't mean that because there are some specific challenges by Africans in different geographical places, it doesn't mean that you throw away the concept of unification, right? The concept of being Pan-African. The paper also highlights the idea that if you're looking to walk, right, to transport yourselves from one place, one landmass, right, across time, which is like 400 years, if you're expecting to be able to just fall into and gel with the community that's there and the culture that's there, you're fooling yourself. I would never think that. I would never think that. Listen, I've been to, I come from the Caribbean. I've been to several different Caribbean countries. There are similarities on one hand, and there are differences on the other. But we ain't tripping on the differences. So if you leave the US or the Caribbean, you go to the continent and you find, well, they kind of live a little different. You know, maybe they're using outhouses and all this type of stuff, right? Deal with it. And prepare yourself before you venture to those places. In the chat room, KW7 says Israel is a glorified welfare state. Absolutely. It's a welfare state, and taxpayers are paying for their children, right, born in the US, to be able to go back, right, and see their quote unquote hometown, which just came about in 1946, by the way. But right, they go to see their homeland, right? We don't have an apparatus, or at least not a widely known one, that allows us to send our children back to West Africa, right, to get to know those places. But again, and this goes to the idea of repatriation. You can't just repatriate. I see black folks talking this shit all the time. You cannot just repatriate. You better hunker down now and understand where you and your peoples come from, and start doing studies on those areas, not just historical, but contemporary studies as well. Get to know what you're setting yourself up for. And at the end of the day, I'm gonna tell you something, it ain't that bad. Your proximity, you know, of being a population within an American nation has you living a certain way, which is what some of you use to clown Africans and Caribbeans and stuff like that. But in reality, it ain't that bad. The only reason why you have folks leaving their hometowns to come, their home countries to come to the US, is because the US does have more opportunity. How much more? Well, that's a different conversation for a different day, but there is more opportunity. A lot of the reasons why there's more opportunity is because the US and their foreign policies have destroyed opportunity in some of the people's home countries, where there ain't nothing going on in some folks' home country. So it's better off to take your talents and bring him to South Beach or something like that, like LeBron, right? I don't see any more activity in the chat, but you guys let me know what were your overall thoughts of the paper. If you thought it was a good paper, hit 1. If you thought it was a bad paper, hit 2. If you want to explain either selection, hit me up now. I'm going to do a station ID break and come back. Hopefully there'll be something here when I return.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And also make sure to check out the Queen's Council podcast. Also make sure to check out the Queen's Council podcast as well. In the chat room, Kevin Care 42 is still with us. He says materialism, self-doubt is what's holding us back. Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly it right there. And again, that statement that you made, Kevin Care 42, that goes to this rhetoric you're talking about. Well, if we go over there, we get it popping, whatnot. No, you guys have gone there and couldn't stand it because it wasn't at the same level of materialism, right? Of what you left in the U.S. We got to get over that materialism. We just and the self-doubt. That's a number one killer, right? We just gotta get knowledge. Get knowledge of self. That will take away the self-doubt, right? By the way, ain't the Chinese and them going over there in rural Africa and stuff like that and doing bullshit, right? Aren't these Boers and stuff going over there to rural Africa and making it work? How can't you go and make it work? KW Don says something very interesting here too. Says you may need to visit 5 different nations before you repatriate for good. And I agree. I've said that before on the show. Don't just pick up and go to Africa. I had a friend from France, an African woman from France, who lived in New York. We used to do music together back in the day. And she up and went to Ethiopia. And, you know, the way communication is, you know, a person who goes to Ethiopia, for example, you mightn't hear from them for like 2 years. When I heard from her again, she was making a trod from Ethiopia to Kenya or something like that. I forget where she was heading to now. But, you know, Ethiopia wasn't exactly what she expected. You know, and so she had to go elsewhere. She could have eliminated some of that if she had visited couple of different places before she wholesale took her and her daughter, her young daughter at the time too, right, to the continent. KW Don 7 says 1, meaning he liked the paper. That's good. I'm glad you liked it. Kevin Care 42 says, as a youth growing up in the 80s in Jamaica, I did not have a lot, but was happy and free. Yeah, most people will tell you, you know, daily affirmations from Pauline, she'll tell you, like, struggling, you know, day to day it was rough while you were in it, but you look back on it now and it really wasn't that bad, you know. And even while we were going through it, we still had some good times, you know, using outhouses and all that stuff. Trust me, it ain't that bad. KV says a disconnection from nature and reality also hampers the repatriation process. A disconnection. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what that made me think of, and maybe this is what you're saying, which is an excellent point. Others have made this point. I've talked about it on the show before. Like black folks stateside here, we're not hunting. We're not camping. We're not heavy in the wild and all that kind of stuff. In fact, what most of us tend to do in the States is live in a big city. Meanwhile, our enemy is, I've worked with some of these guys, and as soon as some holiday comes up in the States, say like a 3-day weekend or 4-day weekend, they're gone camping somewhere. They're in Montana or something like that, up in a mountain somewhere. They're camping. They're roughing it up, right? And so we don't do that. We have disconnected ourselves from nature, right? And the real world, not the cityfied existence, but the real world. So much so that if you were to try to go back to the continent or even go to the Caribbean, right, and try to live in a rural area, you wouldn't make it. You wouldn't make it. Kevin Kerr says, technology is another thing that's killing the mind, body, and soul. We care too much about social media and what the celebrities are doing. Bad eating habits affects the mind. All true. Everything y'all saying here is absolutely true. Because of being in America, in proximity to all that America is, this kind of like decadence of technology and living and stuff like that, that's gonna screw you over. But the truth of the matter is, your counterparts here, they're doing the things that keep them connected. I'm not saying all, of course. Some of these guys are in the city and they ain't moving from the city and all that kind of stuff. That's true. But a lot of these guys, let's say a lot of these folks who come to New York, these other folks who come to New York, for example, come from North Carolina and South Carolina and Dakota and all that stuff, they get up out the city. They take a drive out to the boondocks and live under a tree for a couple of days every so often. They turn the cell phones off. We don't really do it as a people. Like I talked about a little while ago, like which black person do you know? If you live in a big city, which black person do you know that owns their own workshop at home? Who goes in a workshop and tinkers and builds stuff and fixes stuff? I am certain it's very few. So this is why we have this disconnect. Everything you guys, KW Don, Kevin, Care, KV, everything y'all said is absolutely true and relevant to what we read here in this story. We have disconnected ourselves so much so that to go home feels alien. So that's what we got to work on, guys. I want to thank all of you who were here with me for these 2 hours, 20 minutes or so. 15 minutes. I want to thank all of you for being here. I see that we have as many likes as concurrent views. I appreciate that. That's what helps. That helps the channel. Okay? That helps the channel grow. That helps the videos to come up and be seen. Right? And so I want to thank you guys for joining me. I see some activity from the chat room. I will never leave without addressing what you guys take time to type in the chat room. KV says, yes, you understood me. Dirt roads, bathing out of a water drum, and outside markets, to name a few examples, would tire a lot of Western raised. KV, can I, if you don't mind me asking, where are you from? Like, did you experience this in the U.S. personally? Did you grow up in the dirt roads and bathing outside in the water drum? I could tell you, that's what we did back home. We grew up bathing in a zinc tub and a bucket and all kind of stuff like that, right? Bathing outside, as a matter of fact. Going to the market outside. I mean, that's what we did, right? Are you from a place in the U.S. that had that kind of living? Personally, right? Kevin Care42 says, during this pandemic, I was able to publish 6 books, which would have taken me 20 years. That's absolutely correct. I said that early in the pandemic. If you didn't take that time, and I know not everyone got the time off from work, and not everyone was in a situation where they were home and still getting paid, and stuff, but if you didn't have a project or two, you kind of fumbled the ball there, right? You kind of fumbled the ball there. Sometimes when you rough it out is when you get the most work done. All right, I'm still waiting for KV to answer that one little question for me before I bounce. But like I was saying before I read the last few comments, I appreciate you guys. Thank you for coming by. As some of you who are new here, you might not know, but I do a show every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And you know, because this show did so well, was well attended, if you join the Discord, like I put the link up, what I've done a couple of times, I've shown a movie on Saturday nights. Maybe we might be able to aim for a movie next Saturday night. All right? Maybe we should aim to do a film next Saturday night. We could all watch it in the Discord together. We could talk about it afterwards if you want to. But join the Discord today so that you'll be updated, and so that you'll know, you know, what movie choices we have and what time we play. And I see Abba Labala is here. Abba Labala, where are you from? Because I think you're new here as well. I don't remember seeing you here before, but I do appreciate you being here. Where are you from? Kevin Care42 says to KV, he's from Denham Town, Kingston 14. And he left in 1987. I see. He said that because KV previously said, I was born in Jamaica and mostly raised in the US, but have experienced those things, and I'm fine with it if I need to do it. Beautiful. You know, I feel a similar way to you. I've gone through it before, so, you know, urban living won't really be a big deal for me. Kevin Care says, check out the movie The Brotherhood of the Bell. They Live, Sankofa, and the spook who sat by the door. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to copy that, and I'll put that as options in the Discord. Again, if you're not a part of Discord, click the link I've been posting in the chat, and you could join the Discord, and we'll have this discussion. I'll put it out there. Which film would you like to see next Saturday at 8, right, in the Discord? I had asked Abalabala to respond with where they're from, but nothing. By the way, does anyone here want to be a moderator for future live streams of the show? I know KW Don 7 is a moderator. I appreciate him for that. But if there are others who want to be moderators, look at that. Okay. If there's others who want to be moderators, let me know now so I could click you in to be a moderator in the future, you guys. I know if you have a link to post to highlight your YouTube channels, you'll be able to do that if you're a moderator. So let me know before I leave. I'm leaving in like a minute. KW Dawn 7 says, I am a Canadian. Okay, Kevin Care. You are a moderator for the channel now, okay? KW Dawn says, I am a Canadian born to Jamaican parents. Okay, KW Dawn 7, I didn't know that. Good to know. That's cool. So there's a lot of Caribbean folks here, including myself. So KV says to Kevin Care, I was taken out when I was a toddler, but sent back for a time. That's a common thing to do. And Kevin Care says, cool. All right, guys. I don't want this episode to be too long to dissuade people from clicking on it in the future. But I really appreciate you guys. Hopefully you guys will come through and I'm on again Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And we can have a similar lovely discussion over a paper or over a movie or what have you in the future, okay? Until next time, guys, this has been the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.